once, your defense gets shot to shit. So if you're looking strictly at a one-on-one situation where a troll has this one really powerful attack, right? But you're attacking, let's say, Nyx, right? So Nyx had 400 plus defense, or evasion. And he also had 350 plus weapon skill. And then I'm in combat parry, so the way combat parry worked and stuff like that. So now my defense is effectively like 1,000%. Your one attack, chances are your one attack, if it even hits, is going to do almost nothing. And now because of the way Berserk worked, I'm going to flip back into combat aggressive, and then I'm going to destroy you. So, again, you can toy with the idea of making it so, all right, well, Berserk is this really super powerful hit, and you're only really going to see the negative feedback if I miss. Or you can be like, all right, well, does it need to drop your defense to 0? Regardless, does it need to drop your defense to 0? So you can toy with that idea, right? So all right, well, I hit you with a super powerful attack, but maybe instead of my defense going to 0, it gets halved, or it gets like quartered or something like that, until I attack again. So you can toy with that idea as well. I mean, either way, I don't think they're bad ideas, but again, trolls were victim of just the direction the game went, where defense kind of trumped offense, with the exception of a few skills like backstab and drain and like lizard breath and stuff like that. If you just had a single attack, you were kind of like, you weren't really doing much unless you were kind of ganging up on someone. Zombies were again a perfect example of that. Pummel was a very powerful ability, but chances are 9 times out of 10 you're just gonna whiff if someone's in parry. Or if you're just one-on-oneing them, you're not going to do all that much damage, and then they have double, and they're going to stun you with the first hand and chain stun you, and then double is going to keep cutting into your defense, and you're just going to die. So.
Right. Yeah. And what about pummel? Like, is that something that a troll should have as well, or is it? Do you think Berserk is enough?
I don't know, honestly, because trolls had Berserk and melee. And melee, definitely of the two skills, was the more underutilized ability. So, I mean, again, like, would trolls use pummel more if they had the opportunity, or would they stick to just using Berserk if Berserk wasn't as detrimental as it was? So, I mean, that was again, you can look at that as an ability. That's something Chaos never had. Chaos never had pummel. Right, so if you're going to give it, then who would be the class that you would give pummel to, right? You definitely wouldn't give it to lizardmen, right? So trolls would be the job that you would most likely end up giving pummel to. Paladins had pummel; they never used it. There was no reason to. Why would they ever use pummel? They had double and pets. Right. So zombies, all they had was pummel. So that's all they were left with. So that's all they could use. If zombies had double, I guarantee you they would never use pummel.
That's true.
It was pretty much broken, so. That's something that's going to have to be looked into. I think it can be made a lot better.
But then you fall into the trap of abuse that fatiguing does. Again, if you could pummel people, again, there was a lot of flaws with it. Like if you're unconscious, I can't remember. There were certain commands you couldn't do anymore if you're unconscious. I don't know if you could plan.
You could do almost. I think you could plan, but you couldn't do like normal talking in the room. Or
you could snore, but that was it.
Yeah, there was a few things you couldn't do. So, I know Atriu was like one of the biggest abusers of fat spells and tapping and stuff like that, and he would purposely go out of his way to fat tap people and uncon them, and leave them there. And just sit on them while they're unconscious, and keep them unconscious, and just so monsters would come and kill you.
Okay, I love that guy. I just want to say it. I love that guy.
He and that was a big deal.
You heard it first, guys. Devlich loves an ogre.
Yeah, so that was so I mean, and then the wizards ended up getting fat spells for a while, and then it became, all right, well now everyone's abusing it to knock people unconscious just to have them murdered by monsters. And fat tapping, again, the other problem with fat tapping, which is why it got taken off of ogres and wizards, is because if you were zeroed with fat tap, it was 100% guaranteed you were stunned. Once you hit 0 or -0 fatigue, you were 100% stunned. And you couldn't move out of the room because you had no fatigue. So that was that was bad.
It can't be all or nothing, though. You can't like have it completely garbage or completely awesome. There has to be a good mixture.
There was, and Coven had it. And if you look at some of my logs with Gil, you would I'll send them to you. You can see how it worked well. Coven had fat spells that were pain based, and that's how I would kill lizards. I would kill lizards by
Nice.
I would wither agil them, and then I would fat them out because your damage also was dependent on how much fatigue you had. And if I got them to did a couple 200 damage hits with fatigue, their double would do like 40 damage, and their breath would most likely whiff. And that's how I would kill people like Vision and Denix and stuff like that on Gil.
Right.
And that's all I would do in battles too on Gil, because he wasn't all that powerful. He was only like level 54, 53. So I would just wither Jill everybody.
Hey, got it done.
So it was like a bootleg lethargy ward. I would just wither Jill everyone. But people like Heat would get around that by maxing out their spell list, because at a certain point you couldn't get more than 20 spells on you. So ogres and stuff like that would make sure that they weren't victim. They didn't fall victim to things like that.
Yeah, and I think that they actually were only able to achieve that majority of the time by ghosting. So
it depends. I mean, because Chaos in particular had a lot of buffs from orcs, more than I think good for sure. I think maybe comparable to evil. And ogres, again, mages, they had a lot of self buffs. I mean, you had the 4 elemental buffs, you had the 3 shields, and then you had the combat from orcs, and there was some other stuff, like I think they had a couple other things, and then your regular your gear. So they could get it easier than a lot of other jobs for sure. Like I could never get that on Gil, on my Coven, but Dio could get it.
right.
You get commanding, you get perception, you get tough skin, you get sheen, you get dark, light, whatever.
Yeah, so that actually brings up another thing, which is Inferno, among a lot of things, and you know this more than anyone probably, bitched about a lot of stuff, but one thing in particular was tough skin, and how casters such as the Burning Hand demons, that they wore like leather, right? Just regular leather.
Yeah, it was like leather. Yep.
So, but they were able to cast like tough skin, and then they changed it a little bit, and then they also had something to do with their magic points or something like that. Is there any kind of discussion there to be had?
Tough skin, basically the way it worked, or was supposed to work, is it gave you effectively the armor settings of the level of the tough skin. So so revenants, wizards, and ogres, for example, had level 5 shields. So we in turn have level 5 tough skin. So we would wear cloth, and tough skin 5 along with level 5 shields effectively kind of gave me like plate armor per se. Maybe better than plate armor, because every armor type, if you actually wore the armor, had its own distinct advantages and disadvantages to spell types and weapon types. So, for example, plate had a bonus modifier defensively against like cold and like slashing and stuff like that, and thrust, but it was weak versus crush, for example, and weak versus I think earth, if I'm not mistaken. So if you were cloth wearer, cloth was neutral to everything except maybe I think thrust. I think thrust was super effective or strong versus cloth. So I had basically plate armor without any of the disadvantages and all the advantages. The problem though is you can wear plate, but if you're like level 1, it doesn't matter. Your plate armor means shit, because you're still going to get destroyed by a level 60 character or whatever the case may be. So Revenants, for example, defensively, they had like weapons vuln. They had like 10% weapons vuln, and they had like very little evasion, and they couldn't train weapons. So that's another thing, which is why ogres in particular were defensively way better than wizards and revenants, because they can actually train weapons. And because again, when you go into combat defensive, combat parry, which is what 90% of the time casters were in, unless they were actually casting. Then they were in combat normal. So you would never catch a Revenant or a Wizard or an Ogre in PvP. You would never catch them in combat aggressive. They would never do that unless maybe they were trying to kill a zombie or something by smashing. But those abilities were actually really strong on the tappers in particular, because again they could be in combat parry forever and they kind of had plate, but you could see the difference in defense through the spectrum once you start throwing in weapons training in, and that was like that's kind of what made ogres a little harder to kill than I guess wizards and revs. As far as Burning Hand goes, they didn't have. I don't think they had Tough Skin 5 though. I think they had up to Tough Skin 4, which was chain.
Yeah, right. And I know that he was trying to get played, or
he was trying to get Tough Skin 5. He wanted what Inferno Dragon wanted for Burning Hand. Number one, he wanted perception. He wanted 2 points in general, for Burning Hand demons. And they toyed with that idea. Him and Gend actually were given 2 points in general at one point, and there's a bunch of logs of them destroying people.
Right.
Because Inferno Dragon was huge. He was like 72, 71. He was a huge Burning Hand demon, and he was max rank. So with 2 points in general, he was pushing like 360 perception, 350 perception. Like he was up there. Maybe like Steven would be like the only person who may have been able to pass on him, and a few other people, depending on light levels and things like that, would be able to pass on him. And he had tap, and he also would train weapons. So he's a Burning Hand demon. So you're talking about someone who is very defensive, could tap, and then on top of that, you're giving him 2 points in general. You know, very few people would be able to stand up to that. So that's part of the reluctance to giving them 2 points in general. And then if you add in Tough Skin on top of like shields and stuff like that, and then your defensive abilities, you know, again you run into that issue where, are we making this class too powerful? Tough Skin though was fine on the main casters. Whether you gave it like level 5 to Burning Hand, that may have been a better alternative to then giving them 2 points in general, or you may find that giving them 2 points in general is something that the job kind of fundamentally should have. Because again, I mean, at that point, there was only really 2 Burning Hand demons really playing near the end of the game, and that was Inferno Dragon and Gend. The job really wasn't very desirable. You know, all they really kind of brought to the table was tap, and you know, Revs can kind of do everything they could do better. So
right, yeah, it's just a very interesting concept, because it's like it seems that, you know, they attempted and succeeded in some areas to have every class and every race and the combinations in between kind of scale at different rates, and you know, that's obviously the whole point of a RPG game. But you know, I like the idea of being able to say, okay, this one character, a werewolf or whatever, will scale this way. They'll be physically not amazing in there, and then you have their primary skill, shapeshift, and then once you reach a certain level, that becomes stronger, and then they kind of scale a little bit more strong, and then so it's interesting, you know, kind of see the different classes in that way.
I mean, in that aspect, really, there's only a handful of jobs that you would see the scaling effectively, like immediately, like where level meant everything. Wolves were definitely like the most prime example, the most glaring example of how leveling kind of meant everything, because of just every 5 levels you'd get a wolf form. And again, that wasn't always the case, because we didn't, at one point for a long time, we didn't have a level 55 form and we didn't have a level 65 form. So you would be stuck from, like, you know, I made it to 60 with the level 50 form, and I didn't get my new form until level 60. And then, like, I was leveling with level 60, and then later on we got the level 65 form, which is the Vapor Shrouded Mistwolf, which is actually a really, really good form. Probably my favorite of all of them, because it had the Water Sigil, and Water Protect was very, very rare. I think the only job that readily had it was, I think, Wizards. I think Wizards had all Elemental Protect. I I think they could give them because they had all lists, so they actually had water protect. They had every access to every element except pain, I think, and I think they had